If you didn't have employees and you were working at this labor rate, this defined labor rate, would you be able to survive? And I would venture to say no. Welcome back to another midweek Modern Craftsman. I'm sitting here wondering why my setup sounds so much different today. And I realized that it's either my right ear is not working or the right side of my headphones is not working. I believe it's the headphones, but I will circle back with all of you and confirm. So this midweek, I am going to be talking about one of the biggest mistakes that I see and that I've done myself, but see a lot of small builders and remodelers make, which is undervaluing their own time. And this was based on a consulting call that I had last week with a client. If you are billing yourself similar to your crew, you're probably leaving money on the table. You're not structuring your business correctly. You're not making the money that you should. Realistically, you're just not running the business that you should. So I want to dig into why that mindset is more than likely holding you back. All right, my wife just came into the room. My right ear is working, so it's got to be the headset. So I know that all of you are most likely sitting on the edge of your seats wondering, both ears still work, just the headset's broken. So I'm going to take this one out. So this was a great consulting call, another first-time caller. Really enjoyed learning about their business, what they do, how they've grown a little bit. But at the end of the day, again, a smaller contractor, like most of you guys and girls who listen to this, still belt on a couple employees, I think at most 5 employees. Just I felt the way that things were structured, a lot of it was structured in a way to offer value to their client from a price perspective, from a convenience perspective, but not necessarily value as far as, hey, this is the best business that we can be. So one of the big takeaways, not necessarily for me, because I kind of said it in passing, but for this consulting client, was that he shouldn't be billing himself out at the same rate that he's billing all of his labor out at, and why he shouldn't be doing that. And there's numerous reasons why. But for me, the big thing is just opportunity cost, right? If you're making the same amount as everyone else, so you have swinging a hammer, yeah, maybe you swing a hammer part of the time, but remove you from the business and that business cannot survive. You could probably plug and play some people within that price point or that labor rate, yeah, and the business still survives. It's still sustainable, but without you, that business does not survive. So even if if you're performing tasks that are field related or trade specific, that doesn't mean that you need to charge the same amount, right? There's an opportunity cost there. Without you, that business, it's unsustainable. Your clients are not getting the same experience. So you have to ensure that you are charging a premium when you are a smaller contractor, when you're still built on for yourself, even if you have employees. If you have less employees, even more critical. What are some of the core problems being a smaller business, an owner-operator, somebody, with up to a handful of employees, 5, 6 employees, which is on the bigger end, I feel, of contractors who resonate with me. But still, in the grand scheme of things, a really small business. There's such a limited amount of hours that you can capture being a smaller contractor, even if it's you and 5 employees. You just do not have the volume of billable hours that bigger companies have. They have 12 employees, they have 24 employees, they have 50 employees, right? The opportunity to make money on their employees is so much greater because they've scaled their business. Pros and cons of that. I'm sure if you've listened to this for any extended period of time, you know my stance on that and why I prefer to remain small and be a higher profit margin, lower volume based contractor. But this is really critical for small teams. And the smaller that you get, the more critical it is in order to remain profitable to ensure that you're capturing your hours. If there's one of you, you have 2,000 hours that you might be able to capture in a year, probably less than that. Because if you think about the back end paperwork, inefficiencies, mistakes, you finish a job on a Thursday, you're not going to start the next big job on a Friday. There's downtime. You should have vacation. You should have sick time. So like field hours, billable hours that a client sees you, it's going to be less than 2,000, right? Start adding employees, 4,000, 6,000. It goes up from there. But at the end of the day, it's still a very small number, especially when you realize what you can bill for. So you have to control your overhead. You have to build efficiencies. You have to ensure that you're getting a premium for your labor and that it's not just 75, $100 an hour, because you will not be able to survive on those numbers. Having separate line items, like in a perfect world, right? As a business owner, even if you're an owner operator, right, you would have separate line items like the bigger companies do, where you have overhead. You have administrative costs. You have direct costs separate for those jobs. You are capturing your risk, your liability, all through separate line items, and then you have your labor rate depending on what tasks you're performing in a perfect world. Typically, as smaller business owners, we don't do that. We don't break those apart. Our clients aren't used to seeing work like that, so they're pricing like that, invoicing, so they're not asking for that. But in a perfect world, that's the way that it would look. Depending on the way that you price things, for me, I'm T&M, so I don't have overheads associated with them. I have loaded labor rates associated with them. So my loaded labor rates must capture all of the overhead for my business for each additional employee. So when I determine my labor rate, it's based on a worst case scenario. It's based on me just being on the job. It's based on a limited amount of hours. I have a lot of overhead that I have to capture for every hour that I work. That overhead with relative to what I'm charging for my labor rate is high. When you start adding employees, that overhead and certain economies associated with that overhead can become lower, and they can gradually go down. So I have to capture less of that overhead in my hours. So it looks more appealing, and I can manipulate the budget accordingly to kind of disperse and allocate that overhead across multiple employees. So that's a benefit of having those multiple employees. But you should still, even if you're working T&M, be accounting for all of them, and your labor rate should 100% be different than everyone else. Because if I'm on the job, there's certain aspects of my job that other people can't do. There's certain strengths that I bring to the table. So that loaded labor rate needs to be different than any of my employees' loaded labor rate. Or if you're hiring people or whatever your structure and setup is, it should be different. But for me, again, relatively speaking, capturing all of those overheads in my rate makes my rate look really high. So what do? I have to make sure that my markups on materials, subcontractors are correct. I have to make sure that I am charging for management. So that helps me reduce that rate now, because there's certain tasks within those projects that I'm charging a management fee or a labor rate allocated to management that I didn't before. I was relying on an overhead. So now for those jobs, maybe my hourly rate comes down, but I'm capturing more hours. So it's the optics of it, right? So instead of saying that I'm just going to have a higher markup on my subs, a higher markup on the materials that I'm selling, or a higher labor rate, I'm going to reduce my labor rate and I'm going to capture more hours. So the big number at the end is still the same, but when they're looking at the optics, it just doesn't look like I have this ungodly labor rate. You could break out, depending on your pricing structure, all of these overhead costs, so that your clients can say, okay, this is going towards office work. This is going towards supplies. This is going towards rent. This is going towards vehicles. Whatever those overhead items are, they can understand that, and then your labor rate comes down because it's not loaded with all of those numbers. The other thing I have to ensure is that I maintain a really low overhead. So how do I do that? I do that through operating my business as efficiently as possible, ensuring that my investment, my tools, buy once, cry once, buy quality. I'm not replacing things every year. I shop around to ensure that my insurance prices are ideal. I make sure that I have efficiencies within my business. I make sure that I don't have a lot of costs associated with my business that are just unnecessary that I cannot pass on to clients. So I drive my overhead as low as possible to increase my margins. And that's what it takes to make money as a small business. But again, at the end of the day, I'm pricing things as a worst case scenario, right? It's just me on a job. I'm not relying on having multiple employees to make me money. So I have to understand who my customer is. I have to understand what my numbers look like, who I'm selling to. And I have to make sure that I'm capturing all of those hours, and it cannot be at a reduced rate. If I'm capturing a rate that's similar to me bringing on an employee, I'm going to be losing money unless I have separate allocated line items for the overhead associated with my business, which I don't because I'm T&M. So it's a loaded labor rate, the way that I price things. So I have to make sure that I am capturing a much higher premium than I would if I had an employee's labor rate. So another thing to consider, right, is the opportunity cost. And this is a big one for me. And it's something that I didn't consider until later on down the road. And it comes really, it comes from the same perspective of the core problems, right? Where my time is more than just labor. It's more than just swinging a hammer. There's overheads associated with their strategy, their sales, material acquisition, staging, scheduling, risk, paid time off, insurances, all of that stuff. But there's opportunity costs that I have to understand, right? Certain aspects of my business that other people cannot do. I have to understand that if I'm pulled to a task, that's not to say that I won't do any task, that I won't perform field work, but if I am, there's opportunity costs there that I have to understand the big picture, what my business looks like. Does it make sense for me to go do this? If I am going to do this, what's the reason? Is it because the execution's there, because the planning's there, because there's more communication in order to get it right? And at the end of the day, it's actually going to cost less money to the client if I do it because there won't be mistakes. And I don't have to communicate all of the details to somebody. I don't have to pass these off. I don't have to take on more work to support more overhead to keep the lights on. So what are the opportunity costs if I am performing work not only in the field, but at a reduced rate? What am I giving up by completing and doing that field work at this discounted rate? Could I be landing more jobs, selling more work? Could I be working on my marketing? Could I be marketing myself to better clients? Could I be building? So the result of that, right? You're finding a better client, a better lead. You're able to charge more money for that. You're able to get your rate. You're not competing on price. You're becoming a value-driven contractor. So right now, your sales revenue goes up. The cost of goods sold goes up. And if you're maintaining that overhead or lowering your overhead, now you're making more money. So that's one way, right? A combination of, even if you didn't reduce your overhead, right? If you're able to sell a higher quality product where you're capturing more hours, capturing more of your time, or capturing a higher rate for your time, even if your overhead stays the same, you're going to be making more money. If you can lower your overhead, you're going to be making even more money. So one way to lower your overhead through efficiencies. Can you build better systems? Is there a world that I live in where I can either execute more work at the same input that it costs me now, right? Everything that goes into these projects, all of my overhead, all of my direct costs associated with this work. Is there a way to execute more work at that same cost, right? So now my unit cost for the work I'm putting in place I'm getting more for that, right? So my unit cost where it costs me is going down because of efficiencies, and now my margins are going up. Is there a way to put more work in place with the same amount of input, resource input? Can I be creating a better communication system? Can I be creating better SOPs? Can I be creating better management systems? Can I be investing in software that creates efficiencies and reduces mistakes? Right, all of these are ways that I can increase efficiency or reduce my costs, whether I'm selling more work or not selling more work, that makes me more money. So efficiencies are going to make you more money in that sense. Again, focusing on the communication, focusing on how you're managing your subcontractors, how you're managing the work that's being done, how you're corresponding with clients, all of these things to reduce the time that it takes to execute a job. If you can create efficiencies, there's less resource input. You should be making more money. So if you want to double down and you want to work more, you should be making a lot more, or you can actually make the same amount by working less. So maybe you free yourself up and create some free time in your life. It's really up to what you want. But you also have to consider, if you didn't have employees and you were working at this labor rate, this defined labor rate, would you be able to survive? And I would venture to say no. You're relying on your employees to make you the money that you need. And when you have to hop on the tools, yeah, you're capturing that cost. But what happens if things slow down? What happens if you have a job where it doesn't require employees? Now you're relying on a reduced rate, a discounted rate, without these separate line items to capture the costs associated with you being in business. So you haven't planned or accounted for a worst case scenario. I prefer to account for a worst case scenario. So if I don't have people on the job, I'm making what I need to in a year. If I bring people on, yeah, maybe I make a little bit of money on them. But at the end of the day, I don't have 24 employees that I'm making a few dollars an hour on the labor where it starts to stack up and it starts to add up. I just don't do that volume. I don't have that many employees. Even if you have 5 employees, maybe you make a little bit of money on them. But at the end of the day, the risk, the inefficiencies, the mistakes, the do-overs, the improper management on the back end, a lot of times you're making such small margins on them, and then you are also performing at a reduced rate. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. It's going to be really, really hard for you to make money. So another issue with this reduced price, and a lot of this relates, it's the misallocation of the costs and the pricing associated with you doing the work. Again, if you had separate line items, perfect, ideal world. But nobody who I have spoken with over the past 2 years is doing this. Maybe they have an overhead that they're attributing to the cost of the entire job, and they're anticipating or expecting that to cover these costs, but they're never tracking it on the back end to ensure that it's actually making sense. They're just kind of making up numbers. They're putting these markups on. They're testing how much they can sell, seeing when they're getting kickback from clients, and then that's their markup that they're keeping. When in actuality, you should be exploring other ways to ensure that you're meeting the margins that you need to ensure that you're capturing and maximizing your markup. And maybe that has nothing to do with the client, right? Maybe this is just the going rate for the optics of, hey, this is what our markup is on everything. But you need to ensure that your business is priced and modeled and structured correctly to make sure that you're making the actual amount of money that you need to, and the labor rates are substantiating that and covering that. So for us, most owners are not capturing the time that it takes to run the business, right? We're doing estimates after work. We're running around and doing emails early in the morning. At night, we're meeting with clients. We're leaving the house early to go pick up materials to get the job started before 8 a.m. That is not a billable hour. We're not capturing those costs. Our clients aren't paying for that. We're saying this is just the cost of doing business, yet we do not capture or account for that cost. It's like a tax of doing business, but it's not a cost that we're capturing. So really important, right, that you try and bake that into your rate as a business owner to cover some of the additional time. Yeah, there's times when we can't. Yeah, there's inefficiencies. Yes, there's mistakes. Yes, there's times that we get messed up with traffic or weather or somebody not showing up or a hiccup on the job. Yeah, but these egregious misallocation of cost and omissions from our pricing is what really is going to get you. We do not properly account for the time that it takes, the investment of time as business owners, and we're just looking to capture that through our labor costs. And it typically doesn't add up. So you need to make sure that all of those overhead items, yes, that's one thing. But what about just all of the time that you spend on the business? Think about it. Hey, I just want to swing a hammer. I just want to charge the $7,500 an hour for my time. Well, then I need to pay somebody to do the scheduling. I need to pay somebody to meet with clients to do the estimating. I need to pay somebody to do the invoicing. I need to pay somebody to get to the supplier before work to make sure that when I show up as the owner and all I want to do is swing a hammer, that everything's there, right? What does that cost and where does that live within your pricing structure? Is that a separate line item cost? Is that a percentage that you're putting over the cost of the whole job, over the cost of your labor, over the cost of everyone else? It needs to be accounted for. We don't do that. We have trouble capturing them. We are not maintaining our numbers on the back end well enough to understand that we need to bake that into our rates. So we wind up just doing it for free. We wind up working before work, after work, and just never getting paid for that. So what I would suggest to a lot of people who are experiencing this is to try and understand the value of pulling back from certain aspects of this, right? If you charge a premium as the owner, like from myself, I know that it doesn't make sense for me to perform certain trades. It doesn't make sense for me to do insulation. It doesn't make sense for me to do hardwood flooring. It doesn't make sense for me to do demolition, drywall. There's certain aspects of my jobs that it doesn't make sense for me to do because I can pay people to do that for so much less. I can make the premium that I need to. I can get paid to manage these people, and I still remain competitive. I'm not exhausting the budget on just my hours. So understand what it looks like if you pull back and where you can pull back to still meet expectations, meet the program of your clients, but also meet your own expectations and your own program when it comes to time invested and money to be made. You can be reinvesting that time in marketing and lead generation. Again, maybe you don't do any more work from a numbers perspective, yes, but maybe you say you always just do 4 kitchens a year. Maybe you still do 4 kitchens, but you sell a higher quality of kitchen or a better kitchen job. So the inputs are the same, but you're able to charge more for it because not everyone can execute at the level that needs to be executed for these clients. So you're not really putting more work into place. You're not complicating. You're not increasing your overhead substantially to just all of a sudden now fit this new business model that you created. It's all in line. Maybe you sell a little more, so maybe your insurance goes up a little bit, but nothing crazy. You know, you're not going to do 2x the work and not understand what it takes to put 2x the work in place. And now 6 months in, at the end of the year, putting all this work into place actually cost you money and didn't make you money in the first place. You can be working on client communication and scheduling, right? Refining your scheduling, ensuring that there's less inefficiency, there's less downtime, that you always have a plan if weather shows up, right? If you can't do what you intended to do, if you can overlap subs in a certain way, creating efficiencies within your scheduling can make you money, because now that job, instead of taking 12 weeks, maybe takes 11 weeks, maybe takes 11 and a half weeks. So now you gained yourself a few extra days to either do something else, work on your business more, or set yourself up for more efficiencies on the next project. Make sure that you're spending the time on your back end systems, on your bookkeeping, right? If you pull back from swinging the hammer, there's certain aspects of the bookkeeping and managing the budget on the back end to guarantee that you are not over executing and you are not putting too many resources into this project that you're now not making the money that you thought. So you don't need to necessarily work more hours to make more money. You might be able to work less hours. So if you pull yourself off the tools for whatever time's necessary, you might be able to create these efficiencies within your business, understand your numbers, market yourself to better clients, generate better leads, reduce bookkeeping errors and omissions, track your budget throughout the life cycle of that job, especially during and closing it out. You might be able to actually put less work in place, but your margins go up, right? Or you could put more work into place once you develop these systems, and it's costing you less money to put the work in place. So you're actually making more money. So again, the catalyst for this conversation was just that you cannot be selling your time at this as the same cost as anyone who's working as an employee for your business. And if you are, then you need to be capturing an additional cost for whatever it takes to run that business. And maybe that's overhead. It depends on how you're structured. If you have separate line items for that, if you're big enough that you're cost plus, if you're T&M, if you're fixed cost, maybe it's a line item, right? So, oh yeah, for optics, I can say I'm $75 an hour, but I'm capturing all of these costs in separate line items for the project based on percentage of the sales revenue, based on the amount of time that we're managing the project. It all depends. But if you're going to maintain that same labor rate for an optics perspective, that needs to be accounted for elsewhere in your budget. You aren't just a carpenter. You aren't just labor for this business, like you are the business. You're responsible for the sales. You're responsible for the marketing. You're responsible for the risk, the liability, keeping the lights on, and that needs to be accounted for. It needs to be reflected in what you're being paid, and it cannot come at a concession to you, your lifestyle, your business. If you start treating your time like a valuable asset, you will understand that it costs money to have you on a project, that you bring immense value to jobs, and you will have an easier time charging those elevated or premium based rates for your time. So what you can also do is you can start auditing how you're spending your time, what you're spending your time on, and where you can economize your time, or where you can pull back, like I said, to be spending it on tasks that are better suited to growing the business. Again, I think a lot of people could probably pull back from what they're doing in the field and create a better, more sustainable, more profitable, more streamlined business model, actually sell less hours at the end of the year and make more money from a profit margin perspective. And for me, that's how I build my business. That just creates the lifestyle that I need. That's how I become excited about business, right? It's not necessarily looking to grow, but how can I put the same amount of work in place as the last year without complicating my life or having the need to restructure or sell a bunch more work? How can I put the same amount of work in place from a numbers perspective, from a sales volume perspective, from a revenue perspective, but my cost associated with that, producing that amount of work, go down? And that could be cost financially, it'd be cost from a time investment. You're just creating efficiencies, you're reducing your overhead, and you're further creating the disparity between cost of goods sold and what your overhead is, or what the cost or the resources that's required to put that work in place. To me, that's really exciting. I think it's super interesting. You're not depending on a market to create those margins or better your margins. That's all stuff that you can do on your own to just create a more profitable, sustainable business, where it's not like, hey, I need to bring in 3 more employees because these are the numbers that I need to hit. It's like, well, maybe we could get rid of an employee and we could systemize this, or we could bring in some software, or we could bring in some machinery, something that creates more efficiency with less input, less mistakes, and at the end of the day, a lower overhead. So these are all reasons why, as a business owner, you should focus on opportunity cost. You should focus on the value that you're bringing, the cost associated with you and your business, and what it costs to have you on a job, and that you are just not another labor rate that's going into this job and why that will end up costing you a lot of money, a lot of headache, and a lot of frustration in the long run. So that's going to wrap up this week's midweek. Hopefully it was helpful to you. I appreciate everyone. We had a workshop last week on managing subcontractors, what Nick and I do with that. We did record that conversation. If you're interested in seeing it, maybe shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com. Thanks to everyone who signed up, who showed up, who had questions, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks to everyone who invested in the course. We did run a flash sale on that for people who attended the workshop. Not every workshop will be a sale, but since we've been doing them further and further apart, they have been. But I think we'd like to get one a month in place where we can just get everyone on, have a conversation, ask some questions, just bring some unique insight to a topic that Nick and I have experienced or struggled with. So thanks to everyone who showed up. Thanks for all the support. If you don't mind, head on. You can leave a review for the podcast on Apple, on Spotify. If you can spread the word, if something resonated with you, post a story, tag the podcast, tag the episode. Just spread the word about the podcast. We're looking to continue to grow it. If there's insight that you have, constructive criticism, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear it. If there's something that you'd like more of, right? If you want more conversations on the main podcast with certain type of businesses, with business owners, we would love to hear your input. It's going to be very helpful for us. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to make for a more enjoyable experience for you and for us. So shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com or hello@moderncraftsman.co. If you are interested in any sort of one-on-one consulting, I do that. You probably heard me say it here before, but I do 1 to 2 of them a week. I do have some regular clients that I schedule for once a month, once a quarter. So they are kind of first come, first serve. And then whatever dates I have open, it's usually 1 or 2 per week after that I'm taking and doing consulting calls. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you have a question, you have a concern, you'd like to look at your numbers, I've had people send me their P&L when we look into them and say, hey, this is what we think is wrong. This is where you need to improve. You need to sell more. You need to, a lot of what I've been noticing is just optics of people, right? They're looking to live in a certain world where they don't put the sales volume in place to support the optics of their business model. And they need to make their pricing look more appealing while still making the same amount of money. So negotiating and understanding how to do that from a numbers perspective on your proposals, that you're still making the money you need, but when people see it, it looks more appealing. It looks like a more palatable price to them. So that's something I've been digging into a lot with people. That's going to wrap it up. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, shoot us an email. I appreciate everyone. Spread the word. Thank you. I'll catch you all next week.